Hey everyone, welcome back to Steve's View. When wars begin, the arguments are usually loud and emotional. People argue about who started it, who's to blame, and who's right. But as wars go on, the debate slowly changes. The question becomes something else entirely. Not why the war started, but how it will end. And right now, that question may be the most sensitive and difficult issue surrounding the war with Iran, because something unusual is happening. The United States and Israel, two of the closest strategic partners in the world, appear to be looking at the end of this war very differently. According to recent reporting and analysis from the Wall Street Journal, the gap between Washington and Jerusalem is becoming increasingly visible, and that gap may ultimately determine how and when this war stops. To understand why this issue has become so sensitive, we have to go back to the beginning of the debate in the United States. Since the war began, American public opinion has been arguing over a very basic question: why did the United States enter this conflict in the first place? Supporters of the administration say the answer is straightforward. They believe the United States had to act before Iran could strike first. In this view, American forces in the Middle East were already under threat. If Iran retaliated against Israeli actions, the most likely targets would have been U.S. military bases across the region. From that perspective, striking first was not escalation. It was prevention. Officials such as U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio have argued along similar lines. The logic goes something like this. Once Israel decided to confront Iran directly, retaliation against American forces was almost inevitable. Waiting would only allow Iran to choose the time and place of that confrontation. So the argument from supporters of the war is simple. If conflict was coming anyway, it was better for the United States to act first. But critics see the situation very differently. They believe the United States was drawn into a war that it did not actually initiate. In their view, Israel's confrontation with Iran created a chain reaction that eventually pulled Washington into direct military action. And the controversy grew even more intense when Donald Trump offered his own explanation for the decision to strike. Trump suggested that one of the key voices encouraging the action was his son-in-law Jared Kushner. According to the president, the warning he heard was simple. If the United States didn't confront Iran now, Iran would eventually confront the United States. For supporters, that reinforced the argument for preemption, but for critics, it raised a different concern entirely. They began asking whether American decision-making in the Middle East was being influenced too heavily by the calculations of Israel and its supporters in Washington. That debate has never fully disappeared, but recently the conversation has shifted to something else. The question is no longer just why the war started. The question now is whether the United States and Israel even want the same ending. The reporting from the Wall Street Journal highlights a striking contrast. On one side, the Trump administration appears increasingly eager to declare success and bring the military campaign to a close. In recent remarks, Trump suggested that the operation had already achieved most of its objectives. He described the military progress as being far ahead of schedule and hinted that the end of the campaign might not be far away. But only hours after those comments, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu delivered a very different message. Netanyahu reaffirmed what he called the ultimate goal of the war: creating the conditions for the Iranian people to free themselves from their current rulers. In other words, the war for Israel is not just about weapons systems or military infrastructure. It is about the future of the Iranian regime itself. This difference in perspective reflects a deeper strategic reality. For the United States, the primary concern has always been Iran's nuclear program and its long-range missile capabilities. If those programs can be delayed, disrupted, or significantly damaged, many policymakers in Washington would consider the mission largely accomplished. But for Israel, the threat posed by Iran is not limited to nuclear technology. Israeli leaders have long viewed the Iranian government itself as the central source of that threat. From that perspective, weakening the regime is not just a side effect of the war. It is the strategic objective. That difference in goals naturally leads to different views about how long the war should continue. And we are already beginning to see specific examples of that divergence. One of the clearest concerns involves attacks on Iran's oil infrastructure. American officials have been careful to signal that destroying Iran's energy facilities is not part of Washington's strategy. The reasoning is fairly straightforward. Oil facilities are not just military targets. They are part of the global energy system. Damaging them could send oil prices soaring and create economic shockwaves far beyond the Middle East. At one point, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly emphasized that certain strikes near Tapun's fuel storage facilities were not carried out by the United States. Even some strong supporters of Israel in Washington have warned about the risks of expanding the target list too far. Senator Lindsey Graham argued that attacking energy infrastructure could alienate ordinary Iranian citizens rather than weaken the government. Instead of isolating the regime, it could strengthen nationalist sentiment inside the country. These debates highlight the emerging strategic tension. For Washington, the war increasingly looks like a limited military operation with defined objectives. For Israel, it may look like a rare strategic opportunity, one that may not come again for decades. Israeli analysts have openly acknowledged this dilemma. They know that the United States could decide to end the war at almost any moment. American domestic politics, rising oil prices, and fears of a prolonged conflict all create pressure for a quick conclusion. So Israeli planners may feel that every day of continued fighting matters. If the war could end tomorrow, then today becomes the moment to maximize military pressure. This is why some observers describe Israel's current strategy as fighting every day as if it might be the last day of the war. But if we step back from the daily battlefield developments, a deeper paradox begins to appear. Both sides may be pursuing goals that are extremely difficult to achieve with the tools currently being used. From Washington's perspective, the rhetoric sometimes points in two different directions at the same time. On one hand, the administration has demanded unconditional surrender from Iran. On the other hand, it has repeatedly suggested that the war's primary objectives have already been achieved. Those two ideas are not entirely consistent. If the mission is truly complete, why demand total surrender? And if total surrender is the goal, how can the war be nearly finished? Israel faces a similar contradiction. Its leaders often speak about the long-term goal of transforming Iran's political system. Yet, they also operate under the assumption that the United States might end the war without warning, so they pursue maximal pressure while preparing for an abrupt ceasefire. Taken together, these contradictions suggest that the most likely ending to the war may be far less decisive than the rhetoric on either side. In fact, the war may end without either side fully achieving its original ambitions. Yes, the air campaign could inflict serious damage on Iran's military infrastructure. Nuclear facilities may be set back, missile programs may be disrupted, but air power alone rarely topples governments. And that is especially true in a country like Iran, where the political system has strong mechanisms of internal control. As long as the United States and Israel remain unwilling to launch a full-scale ground invasion, it is extremely unlikely that airstrikes by themselves could overthrow Iran's theocratic government, which leads to the central strategic dilemma of the entire conflict. If the Trump administration cannot help establish a stable alternative government inside Iran or reach a durable agreement with the current leadership, then the long-term outcome of this war may be far more limited than its dramatic opening suggests. Because once the bombing stops, the Iranian regime will likely focus on restoring its internal authority, and over time, it could resume many of the programs that triggered the conflict in the first place. If that happens, then despite the intensity of the military campaign, the strategic impact of the war could turn out to be surprisingly modest. The regime in Tehran may emerge weakened, but still intact. And the fundamental confrontation between Iran, the United States, and Israel may simply enter another phase, which raises the final and perhaps most uncomfortable question of all. Did this war actually solve the problem, or did it simply postpone it? Thanks for watching.